Karen Voss stood in my driveway holding up a phone photo of bird droppings like it was a smoking gun and told me my bird bath was an act of aggression against this community. That was a Tuesday morning in June. 2 weeks later, a state wildlife biologist would call her actions the real violation, and I still have the letter to prove it. My name's Daniel Reyes, and 3 years ago I bought a modest 4-bedroom on Sparrow Hollow Court, the quietest cul-de-sac in Willowbrook Estates. I work remote, I like my coffee black, and every morning before my first call I sit on my back patio and watch whatever shows up at the feeders. Cardinals first always. Then chickadees, a pair of nuthatches that argue over the suet, and if I'm lucky, a flash of blue that means the bluebirds are back. My dad kept feeders his whole life. When he passed, I inherited his old cedar bird bath chipped on one edge, and I set it up in my backyard the week I moved in. It wasn't decoration. It was the one thing that still felt like him. Willowbrook Estates is the kind of neighborhood where the grass gets measured practically. Mailboxes have to be a specific shade of black. Holiday lights come down by January 15th, no exceptions. And running it all with a clipboard and a laminated badge that says HOA President is Karen Voss. Karen and I had crossed paths before, a warning about my trash cans being visible 11 minutes past the pickup window, a note about my porch pumpkin being excessive in October. Small stuff, annoying but survivable. I paid the $10 fine once, rolled my eyes, and went on with my life. The bird bath had been sitting in that same corner of my yard for 3 years without a single complaint. Robins bathed in it every spring. My neighbor's kids used to point at it and ask what kind of bird was visiting that day. It was, genuinely, the most harmless thing I owned. I'd gotten used to a certain rhythm on Sparrow Hollow Court. Trash out Tuesday nights, sprinklers on a timer, the same 6 neighbors nodding at each other during evening walks. My next-door neighbor Priya Nair had 2 kids who used to press their faces against my fence to watch the blue jays dive-bomb the squirrels. Her husband called my backyard the aviary as a joke, long before that word ever got used against me in a much less friendly way. None of that seemed like it would ever become a problem. I was wrong. It started on a Saturday in early June when Mrs. Petraki's 3 doors down found bird droppings on the hood of her white Lexus and posted about it in the Willowbrook Estates community Facebook group. She didn't tag me. She didn't need to. Everyone in that group knew whose yard had all those birds. By Monday, Karen had appointed herself investigator. I watched from my kitchen window as she walked the length of my driveway with her phone raised, photographing my bird bath from 4 different angles like she was building a case file. She didn't ring the doorbell. She didn't ask a single question, she just left. The letter came Thursday, taped to my front door in a plastic sleeve, HOA letterhead, Karen's signature at the bottom in blue ink pressed hard enough to leave grooves. It cited Section 4.3 nuisance wildlife attractants and stated that my bird bath was actively drawing excessive avian activity that constitutes a health and property hazard to surrounding residents. I had 10 days to remove it, July 24th. After that, a fine of $50 a day would begin accruing. I read it twice standing on my own porch, genuinely confused. A bird bath, $50 a day over a bird bath. I called Priya before I did anything else. Has she ever actually enforced Section 4.3 on anyone? I asked. Once, Priya said. The Hendersons' vegetable garden 2 years ago, she called tomato plants a pest attractant. They caved in a week. She paused. You're not going to cave in a week, are you? I don't know yet, I told her, and I meant it. I drove over to Karen's house that evening, letter in hand. Karen, can we talk about this? She opened the door in workout clothes, arms crossed before I even finished the sentence. There's nothing to talk about, Daniel. The birds are your responsibility. You're feeding them, you're bathing them, and now they're pooping on Diane's Lexus and probably spreading who knows what on our sidewalks. They're wild birds. They were here before I put the bath in. I could move it further from the driveway if that would. I'm not interested in relocating a problem, I'm interested in removing it. She said it flatly like she was reading off a script. This is about protecting property values, Daniel. Nobody wants to buy a house next to an aviary. It's a bird bath, Karen, not a zoo. She didn't laugh, she didn't even blink. I'm not interested in relocating a problem. I'm interested in removing it, she said again, word for word, like the sentence had been rehearsed in a mirror. I pulled up the HOA covenants on my phone right there on her porch. Nothing in the bylaws mentioned bird baths, feeders, or wildlife of any kind. The only thing close was that same vague nuisance clause, which could apparently mean whatever the board decided it meant that week. There's nothing in here that actually bans this, Karen. The board has discretion, she said, already closing the door. You have 10 days. I spent the next week trying to be reasonable. I moved the bird bath 15 feet away from the driveway closer to my fence line. I posted politely in the Facebook group explaining that songbirds are federally protected and that I'd made an adjustment to address the concern. A few neighbors liked the post. Karen deleted it within the hour and replaced it with her own, reminding everyone that unauthorized wildlife features were a violation regardless of placement. Then, on July 24th, a certified letter arrived. I hadn't complied fast enough, apparently. Moving the bath didn't count as removal. The fine wasn't $50 a day anymore. It was $100 effective August 1st. And if it went unpaid past 60 days, the letter said the HOA reserved the right to place a lien on my house. A lien over a bird bath. I stood in my driveway holding that letter for a long time. $100 a day is $3,100 a month. I ran the math twice, hoping I'd done it wrong. I hadn't. Karen didn't stop at letters. On July 29th, she called a special community meeting in the clubhouse. And I found out about it because my neighbor Priya texted me a photo of the flyer taped to the mailbox kiosk. I went. 20-some neighbors showed up, most of them people I'd waved to 100 times and never really talked to. Karen stood at the front with a printed handout, my own Facebook post, annotated in red pen, and a stock photo of pigeons on a statue that had nothing to do with my yard. Birds carry diseases, she told the room. Salmonella histoplasmosis. They're basically flying rats, and Daniel's been running an unlicensed sanctuary in a residential zone. I stood up. There's no evidence any of that has happened here. Cardinals and bluebirds aren't pigeons, Karen, and property values actually go up near established wildlife landscaping. There's research on that. Research, she repeated like the word tasted bad. I have a petition, Daniel, 14 signatures, 14 out of 40-some households, I said. That's not exactly a mandate, Karen. A few people laughed quietly and Karen's face went a shade pinker. She didn't answer me directly. She just moved on to the vote, which wasn't a real vote either, since the bylaws only gave the board authority to fine, not the general membership. But nobody in that room seemed to know that yet, including me. 14 out of 40-some households. It didn't matter to her. She had a stack of paper and a laminated title, and that felt in that room like enough. I went home that night angrier than I'd been in years, and also something else determined. I sat at my kitchen table and pulled out a folder I hadn't opened in 2 years, my certified wildlife habitat paperwork. Here's the thing Karen didn't know because I'd never bothered mentioning it. 2 summers earlier, I'd applied through the National Wildlife Federation and my state's Department of Natural Resources to have my backyard officially recognized as a certified wildlife habitat. Food, water, cover, and native plantings, all 4 boxes checked, plaque and all. It was sitting in my garage, actually, because I'd never bothered mounting it out front. My bird bath wasn't decoration. It was one of the required elements of an actual state-acknowledged conservation registration. And tucked inside that same folder was a printout I'd saved without thinking much of it at the time. A reference to Section 1422 of the state's Backyard Conservation Act. Language about registered habitat features being exempt from local ordinance restrictions that don't involve direct safety hazards. I wasn't a lawyer. I didn't fully understand what that section meant in practice, and part of me worried I was reading hope into 3 sentences of legal language I barely understood. I called Priya again that night and read her the section out loud. That sounds like it matters, she said, but you need someone who actually enforces this stuff to say so, not just a printout. She was right. So instead of writing back to Karen, I wrote to the people who would know, the regional office of the state's wildlife agency. I explained the certification, attached the HOA's letters, and asked for a formal determination on whether Willowbrook Estates could legally force removal of a registered habitat feature. Then I mailed it and waited. Karen, meanwhile, wasn't waiting for anything. On August 2nd, she had the HOA's attorney draft the lien paperwork. I found that out because Priya, bless her, was on the architectural committee and slid me a screenshot with a single text. She's not bluffing, be ready. All I had was a folder, a stamp, and a stranger at a state agency who hadn't even replied yet. The reply came on August 16th in a manila envelope with the state seal in the corner. I remember checking the mailbox twice that morning out of habit before it actually showed up, half convinced I'd never hear back at all. My hands actually shook a little opening it. It was 3 pages, signed by a woman named Dr. Elaine Marsh, regional wildlife biologist for the state wildlife agency. I read it standing in my driveway, same spot where Karen had first waved that phone photo at me. The letter confirmed my property's status as a registered certified wildlife habitat, active since October 2 years prior. It stated in plain language that the bird bath and feeder system were core certified elements, not incidental features, but the actual criteria the certification depended on. It cited Section 1422 of the state's Backyard Conservation Act directly, explaining that homeowners associations cannot compel removal or relocation of registered habitat elements absent a documented specific safety hazard, and that generalized aesthetic or nuisance objections, including complaints regarding normal wildlife droppings or activity, did not meet that threshold. Then it went further than I expected. Dr. Marsh noted that my nest box, which I'd mentioned in my letter almost as an afterthought, currently held an active eastern bluebird brood, and that under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, disturbing an active nest or removing habitat features supporting it during nesting season could constitute a federal violation independent of any state protections. I read that paragraph 3 times, then read it out loud to my empty kitchen just to hear how solid it sounded. It was the first time in 2 months that a piece of paper had made me feel like the ground under my feet was actually mine. I called for a board meeting myself the next Tuesday. I'd never done that before. I brought 3 copies of the letter, a copy of my certification, and a printed excerpt of Section 1422 with the relevant lines highlighted. The clubhouse was fuller than I expected. Word travels fast on Sparrow Hollow Court, and apparently so does the phrase federal violation. Karen sat at the head of the table in her navy blazer, badge still clipped to the lapel even though this wasn't technically a general meeting, and I could see her jaw tighten the second she recognized the state seal on the pages I set down. "This is a state wildlife agency determination," I said, sliding a copy to each board member. "My property is a certified wildlife habitat, has been for 2 years. The bird bath and feeders aren't extras, they're the certification requirements. And I've got an active protected nest in that yard right now." "That's not our jurisdiction," Karen said quickly, but her voice had lost the flatness from her porch. "It is when it preempts your authority," I said. "Section 1422 right there. You can't force removal of a registered habitat feature without a documented safety hazard. Bird droppings on a car isn't one. And you fined me anyway, after I told you it was moved, after there was never a hazard to begin with." The HOA's attorney, sitting quietly at the end of the table, cleared his throat. "I'd want to review this fully, but on its face, this is a real exposure issue. If this is accurate, every fine issued is potentially unlawful, and continuing to enforce it, especially against a protected active nest, adds federal liability on top of state." Karen opened her mouth. Nothing came out for a second. Then, "I was protecting this community." "You were guessing," I said. "I did the homework." Board member Tom Alvarez, who'd been quiet the whole meeting, leaned toward me after and said under his breath, "For what it's worth, some of us thought this was insane from the start. Nobody wanted to say it out loud." The board voted that same night 5-1, Karen the lone no. All fines rescinded in writing, delivered to my mailbox 2 days later. The letter formally acknowledged the violation notice had been issued in error and that no further action would be taken regarding the bird bath, feeders, or nest box. By September, the board had drafted an update to the covenant's Section 4.3 now carried an explicit carve-out for state or federally registered wildlife habitat features, something Tom told me they should have had years ago and just never thought about until my folder landed on the table. By September, the board had drafted an update to the covenant's Section 4.3 now carried an explicit carve-out for state or federally registered wildlife habitat features, something Tom told me they should have had years ago and just never thought about until my folder landed on the table. Priya's tomatoes apparently are next on the list for the same protection if the Hendersons ever decide to plant again. Karen didn't run for board president again that fall. I don't know if it was the meeting or the 14-signature petition that quietly turned into 40 neighbors signing a different one asking for new leadership, or just the general mood on Sparrow Hollow Court after word got around about a bluebird nest almost getting somebody sued by the federal government. Probably all 3. She still lives 3 houses down. We wave. That's about where we've landed, and honestly, that's fine by me. The bird bath is still exactly where I moved it, 15 feet off the driveway, chipped edge and all. The certification plaque is mounted by my front door now, where I probably should have put it 2 years ago. Priya put one up too after she got certified herself that spring. Diane's Lexus, for what it's worth, gets washed every other Saturday, same as always. I think about that meeting a lot, honestly, not the win exactly, but the 10 days I spent thinking a laminated badge and a loud voice were just going to be the end of it. They almost were. The only thing that changed the outcome was refusing to accept because I said so as an answer, and being willing to spend a stamp and 2 weeks finding out if I was actually wrong. I wasn't. And now there's a bluebird nest on Sparrow Hollow Court that nobody's allowed to touch, state seal and all. Some nights I still sit out on that patio with my coffee gone cold, watching the feeders empty and fill, and I think about how close I came to just taking the bird bath down. It would have been easier. It would have taken 20 minutes and saved me 2 months of stress. But my dad didn't keep feeders his whole life because it was easy. He kept them because some things are worth the trouble, and I'm glad I finally understood that before it was too late to matter. If you've ever had a Karen of your own, HOA, workplace, group chat, doesn't matter, you already know that feeling of being told no for reasons that don't hold up once you actually look at them. Drop your story in the comments, I read every one of them. And if you want more of these, because trust me, this wasn't my only run-in on this street, stick around. There's more where this came from.